Today's governments and corporations find themselves operating on a global scale, often in challenging settings. From fast-growing entrepreneurial ventures to leading multinational companies, developing a talent pipeline is critical to business success. So on this new frontier, human capital is one of the world's most prized resources, and yet it's really one of the hardest to cultivate. Simultaneously, many people around the world remain economically disenfranchised due to a lack of accessible employment. Entrepreneurship, skills training, and other means of developing employment opportunities for those who need them most offer increasingly accessible ways to foster livelihoods in emerging markets around the world. I'm here now with Wendy Hawkins, Executive Director of the Intel Foundation, and Deborah Holmes is back, America's Director of Corporate Responsibility of EY, and Amini Kajunju, sorry, Amini, President and CEO of the Africa American Institute. We're here to talk about livelihoods and leadership and how leaders at every level of the pyramid are challenging and responding to the challenges of opportunities of catalyzing growth in emerging markets. Now, we'll be turning to Twitter for questions shortly, so if you're following the conversation on Twitter, you can tweet your questions for this incredible group of women at #catalyze with a Z 14. That's #catalyze 14. So let me start with Wendy. Wendy, companies today are increasingly looking at how to create economic prosperity beyond the direct sphere of their shareholders, customers, and employees. What's Intel doing in the area of improving livelihoods, and why is it important to your company?
Well, let's start with the second part of the question first. Why is it important to a company like Intel? It resonates on so many levels for us in terms of developing our own employees and their talents, being able to attract and hire the best talent, being able to raise the economic levels in countries around the world where we would like people to be able to afford to buy our products, developing our own future employee base, and developing the leadership that will allow us to thrive outside the bounds of the developed world where we had our birth and beginning, but operating beyond that today. So,
was there a moment where this dawned on the company internally? What was the thinking process that led to that?
Well, I would say that it was a confluence of a number of circumstances. Certainly, as you will recall, around the turn of this century, there was a lot of discussion about the bottom of the pyramid and about the emerging markets and about being able as businesses to understand the needs in environments very different from the Western Europe and North American environments where we had operated. So that was permeating the atmosphere. At Intel, during those years, we had a CEO who spent most of his life, I think, on an airplane. He was visiting 75 plus countries every year, and he was immersing himself in this environment and what were the changing needs and how might Intel address them. And one of the things I know that he heard regularly from governments as he traveled the world was, how can you help us help our own countries to thrive? How can you help us build economies? Can you come here and can you build a factory? That was always the first thought for them. Build a factory, hire our people, and then they will have jobs and this will be good. And he knew that there were only so many factories that Intel could build and that Intel could continue to thrive. But there were many other ways in which we could engage with people and we could help them to build their capabilities. And in particular, for us, one of those capabilities where we had real expertise, strong motivation, and we had an employee base made up of people with real expertise and the ability to share that. And that is in the effective use of technology, whether it's in education and schools, which is where we did much of our early work, helping teachers not just learn how to do email and make PowerPoint slides, but how to transform the way they think about education to take advantage of the internet and to bring the world into their classrooms as the internet and the computing technology allowed. So that was our first toe in the water. after having trained more than 10 million teachers around the world, many of them, of course, women, the majority of them, of course, women, as is true in the United States, is true around the world, that women are teachers. And seeing that transformative experience that they had, not just as teachers and how they worked with their students, but how it affected their own lives, their own view of themselves as leaders, and having the potential to engage the world in ways that they hadn't anticipated or that we hadn't understood. And then taking that to the next level and the next level, and understanding the impact that our technology had on transforming lives, the ability to use technology effectively, and the impact that that had on livelihoods and giving people skills that allowed them to move into the workforce in ways that we hadn't, frankly, in many cases anticipated, and they hadn't either. Learning from that, and then out of that, developing our own employee volunteers as people who could go out into the field and share the very strong skills that we had, and seeing that the greater impact was really not on the people they were teaching, but on the employees themselves, and their sense of place in the world, their understanding of what the world could do with technology that was really designed with them in mind, and not just, here's something that works in the developed world, now make it work for you, but instead, what are your needs in the developed world, and how do we develop tools and resources that really are effective for you? So the synergies that emerged out of all of those experiences have had a really transformative impact on Intel internally as a company, as well as on our relationships to governments around the world.
And I want to get back to that because I think that's a very important point. By the way, before we go on to Deborah, I misspoke it. It's obviously hashtag Catalyze14. So please join the Twitter conversation, send us your questions, and please join in. So Deborah, what role do companies play in fostering leadership in emerging markets?
Well, you know, I actually want to pick up on something that Wendy said a moment ago, which is that, you know, companies which have this tremendous presence around the world have the opportunity to make an impact when they decide to make that impact in the context of their own sweet spot. So you were talking about Intel and technology, Wendy. For EY, a really natural place for us to start was around entrepreneurship and fast growth companies. And that's because we are the market leader in working with, serving, celebrating fast growth companies. So when we decided to start working in emerging markets, we did it with a focus on entrepreneurial or fast growth companies. And the great thing about that is that, did you know that in Brazil, for example, 66% of jobs are created by small and medium enterprise, just to give you one statistic. So this is a really important sector. And we focused further by really refining our efforts around three populations of entrepreneurs. So we work in particular with women entrepreneurs, with small and medium entrepreneurs, and with youth entrepreneurs. And I can give you an example of the type of thing that we do with each of them. And I know that the topic of partnerships is really important today, so I'll just touch on some of our partnerships. In our work with small and medium enterprise, we work with a global not-for-profit organization called Endeavor. And Endeavor has been around for about 20 years, and what they specialize in is identifying those fast growth companies that are poised for longevity and for inflected growth, tremendous growth. So, you know, a lot of small entrepreneurial companies out there, you want to choose the ones to work with that are creating a disproportionate number of jobs, paying a disproportionately high wage. And that's what Endeavor finds for us so that we can then send EY professionals to emerging markets. We send them to 5 countries in South America and to Mexico to give EY services, their skills at no cost, to these fast growth companies that Endeavor finds for us, and they stay there for a period of 7 weeks. And these are some of our most skilled employees doing this. So that's the small and medium enterprise example. In terms of the women example, we have a program called Entrepreneurial Winning Women, which launched in the US 5 years ago. And it's basically a program to identify really promising women entrepreneurs and give them access to the networks, the capital, the knowledge, the mentors that they need in order to scale. This is not, what I like to say is this is not a woman and two chickens. These are bigger companies. I actually have to check my list because the program, Entrepreneurial Winning Women, is now in Brazil, Indonesia, Russia, South Africa, Hungary, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, in addition to the US. And it's just been a fantastic program.
Yeah, it's interesting. A number of Fortune 500 companies are investing in women, as we know, and women entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
And, as a way to enhance their GDPs.
Yeah.
Amini, everybody knows, are familiar with these companies, Intel and EY, but tell us what the African American Institute does, just by way of introduction.
Absolutely. We've been around for 60 years, and our main focus has been on three things. One is to increase the capacity of African nationals. The second is to increase the capacity of African institutions. And the third is to be a convening organization to bring together Africans and Americans to talk about issues that are important to both places and ways to solve some of the challenges that we're seeing on the continent. And for a very long time, we were known as the institution that brought about 23,000 Africans to come and study in the United States and receive a PhD or a master's in various American schools, almost 430 American schools that we worked with over the years. But I would say sort of in the new dispensation of AAI, there's a lot of sort of problems to solve, but I think some of our sweet spots include some of the things that have been discussed already. Well, one is on leadership and management. We are really interested in working and partnering with American companies, but also African institutions to make sure that we're looking at this issue of leadership and management. We have a very youthful continent. We have a continent that has lots of natural resources and other kinds of resources, but if we're not managing and if we don't have leaders that are running these companies and these nonprofits and these governments well, then all of these benefits will not come to proper fruition. The second thing is we think the other sweet spot is around technical and vocational skills. You know, what's going on in Africa right now is that we have, you know, the Chinese, for example, they're building throughout the continent. Many governments are calling the Chinese and saying, come and build schools, come and build hospitals, come and build roads. These are all very good things. But we must ensure that it's the Nigerian, it's the Angolan, it's the Liberian who then can go back and fix the potholes, who can then go back and fix the incubator in the hospital when it doesn't work anymore, who can fix the air conditioner. So this issue of vocational technical skills is becoming, I think, a very important topic. And when you look at examples of Germany, for example, who have, as a country, they've created this amazing track. When you graduate from high school, you have two very viable tracks. You can go to a university, or you can go to a technical and vocational college and not only get the skills, but get a job and get an internship or an apprenticeship. The other thing that we think is very important is entrepreneurship, and that's been brought up. You know, this country is built on entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs create the jobs, create businesses, would then create jobs. On the continent, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, but many of those entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs because they can't find jobs.
Right.
But what we want to do is really, back to what you said, not just the woman with the two chickens, but we want to improve the capacity of entrepreneurs who can then grow big businesses that can employ people. And so the leadership and the management of businesses is very key. And then last but not least, which is kind of goes back to our traditional work, is helping African nationals access higher education. And the model typically has been to bring people here, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we also need to look at increasing the capacity of higher education institutions on the continent, so that there's innovation and management and leadership coming out of the continent, not just to be used within the continent, but also to go and, you know, go to other places and bring that innovation to the world.
So interesting that you brought up China. For any of us who've traveled in Africa or the Middle East, and you see a lot of Chinese investments, social investments. How is the way their private, somewhat private sector, state-sponsored private sector, how they're doing it, how does that differ from how American private sector is doing it? That's my first question. And my second question is, what mistakes is the American private sector still making?
Yeah, it's interesting that what you just asked is a constant conversation on the continent, because obviously the United States has been in Africa for a very long time. And the Chinese are coming in, and they have a different way of doing things. They're very fast. They don't ask a lot of questions. And they sort of just do the work, whatever is asked of them. And of course, it's an exchange for access to mainly minerals and resources.
Do they employ the population? Do they engage the population?
So here's the challenge. So there are cases where they do, but there are many cases where they don't. And so they bring in labor from China. And this is where leadership at the government level and at the city level is very important. To the extent that Chinese companies are doing that, I think it's the responsibility of African governments to insist in the contracts that that African nationals are being hired to do this work. Not only does it obviously give people access to jobs, but it also increases their capacity, and that's very important.
To what extent are they doing that? Is that just at the very beginning stage?
Some governments are so in a hurry to get the work done that maybe they don't spend the time to make sure that these things are in place. And others may be more conscientious and say, you know what, 75% of your labor force has to be of this country, and you must leave certain technology, or you must teach people certain things. But I think that's going to be key. You asked about the mistakes that America may still be doing. I think there are many Americans who still see Africa as a scary place, and not only that, but as a place where, I call it the 3 Ds, where there's death, despair, disease. And Americans really have to move away from that thinking and really see the continent as a place for partnership and for investment. Because many Africans are hungry for jobs, for technology, and to the extent that America can bring that, I think there will be so many opportunities for both places.
So now we have a question from Twitter for all three of you. How can U.S. companies best promote local innovation in emerging markets? And where is the government partnership needed?
Well, the ways in which we have been working with local governments and in building local innovation have been to all of our work virtually around the world is done through public-private partnership. And as you can imagine, there are some countries where those partnerships are relatively easy to establish and easy to manage, and some places where it's really hard work.
Yeah.
And we go into it with our eyes open, and we understand that it's going to be in some ways more of a challenge, but if you want to bring about systemic change, if you really want to leave behind systems that allow the change to become part of the culture and to empower people with skills, then that's, to our mind, the most important thing to do. Some of the ways specifically go back again to that notion that one of the most important values and tools that we bring to any conversation is our skill and knowledge about technology and how to use it and how to teach others to use it effectively, and how in return to learn from them as to how we can do a better job of designing technology that meets those needs. Mm-hmm. So that very positive cycle is built into the volunteerism, the professional development work that we do, and that includes the training that we do of teachers and educators and government people. And then increasingly in recent years, we've become, as you had mentioned, many other companies have done as well, we've become increasingly focused on girls' education and on women and livelihoods, which often is focused on entrepreneurship and the skills, in particular the technology skills that support that kind of shift into the ability to take ownership for their own employability and creating jobs not only for themselves but in many cases for other women. So we do a lot of work in that arena as well.
Innovation?
Well, just say two things, really? One is local relationships, and the other is two-way mentoring. So local relationships, you know, we're not, I mean, we may be the experts and that's how we're going in, but it's really to build the capacity of the local folks. They're going to have the most innovative ideas. They're going to know what works best in their context. What we're bringing is a set of core skills, if you will, and we're going to impart those to them. But what we're recognizing is that the talent is there and the knowledge is there. So the local relationships, I think, is key. And then the other thing is the two-way mentoring. Again, yes, we may have a set of skills that they want. And in our case, it's often because we're so big and we have such tremendous specialized knowledge that, you know, if we're working with an entrepreneurial company in Chile, they're not going to have that level of knowledge. We have it, but they know their local market. We don't. And we have a lot to learn from them, right? The knowledge doesn't only flow one way. So that'd be my answer.
Amini?
Yeah, I mean, everything that's been said is correct. The one thing I'll add is, you know, our TLP program, the Transformational Leadership Program, which is currently being funded by the Coca-Cola Africa Foundation. You know, I think of this woman that as a result of the training that she received and the leadership and management training that she received, she's been able to take people off the streets of Lagos, and men, women, and children, give them tools and skills, really sort of clean them up, give them tools, give them skills, give them confidence, and then they're able to get back to the world and raise their families and get jobs, etc. And a woman like that, I think we need to empower her with more skills and resources so that she can do the work that she does even better. So to what's been said, the innovation is there locally, but oftentimes people are bogged down with so many worries and the inability to go big and really make an impact. They start really small and they need more. So anything that we can do as nonprofits, as governments, as private sector to support those initiatives, I think you'll see a lot of innovations coming out of that.
And what would be your advice to the private sector in finding those kinds of entrepreneurs who have the capacity to go big?
Well, talk to AI.
Okay.
Let's start there.
Good answer. Yeah.
But I think, you know, that access to local institution and people who understand the space, I think, is going to be big. I think to plan even a really great program somewhere in New York without access to what's going on the ground, you'll miss a lot of things, and there are going to be a lot of blind spots. So obviously, you know, talking to institutions at AAI who understand what's going on the ground is important, but also having those local relationships is going to be key.
You know, with all of this focus on women and women entrepreneurs in developing countries, have we seen the impact of that yet? What are you seeing?
Well, you know, one of the ways we talk about it at EY is that women are actually the largest emerging market, right? I mean, if you look at behind China and India, women are the third billion. In fact, I think I've seen some statistics that say that women's share of income is going to go from 13 billion to 18 billion over the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. And that incremental 5 billion puts women as a block at the forefront of, you know, any growth organization that you can think of. So yeah, I think that we're doing a lot actually to position those women for the kind of growth that they are going to be claiming, to make sure that they have the skills and the capacity, as Amini was just talking about, to be able to succeed. And I think we're absolutely already seeing the results of some of those, both from the standpoint of public-private initiatives focused on women and women's capacity, and from the standpoint of outcomes, the share of women who are starting companies and whose companies are thriving. So yeah, I think we are absolutely seeing progress in this regard.
We've got another Twitter question. What are the challenges and opportunities in leveraging human capital to spur growth? Something we've touched on a bit, but let's go. You know,
one of the challenges I think even private companies maybe struggle with is the issue of impact and how quickly do you see it. I think, you know, when you invest in education, for example, and anything sort of related to capacity building, you have to have a long-term view. There's some immediate sort of positive effect, but education is one of those things where you invest in it today, and then you're really going to see the investment and its effect positive over time. So I think, for example, private institutions, they have to be patient, right? I think there's patience that needs to be put in order to sort of see it for the long haul. And then, you know, the other thing is also working with governments, making sure that, you know, African governments have to be part of the conversation when it comes, particularly when it comes to education and other public goods, because public goods are typically supposed to be provided by government. And to the extent that a private sector company or a nonprofit is a part of that conversation, I think governments we have to increase their capacity too, to make sure that they're putting in the right investment in these public goods like education, like health, etc.
Well, the challenges and opportunities for leveraging human potential. One of the things that we've been involved with for the last 3 or 4 years has been, we were sponsors for the film Girl Rising, which really focuses on girls' education and the impact that that has on the world. And one of the things that we really internalized and learned out of that experience is that educating girls is the single most impactful way that all of us who are concerned about raising wealth and income and health around the world, that single action has the greatest impact of any one thing that we might do. That girls who are educated, they stay in school, obviously, their children are educated, their newborn children survive at a far higher rate. They avoid pregnancy themselves far longer, and they raise the GDP of their countries in real and measurable ways. All of those simply by educating girls. And one of the things that we have taken on as a result of what we learned there was, again, going back to our roots as a technology company, to think what was it that we could bring to bear there, and that is that we have done research with NCRW, the National Council for Research on Women, determined that there is in fact a very significant gap in the access that girls and women have to the internet and the ability to use it, but between girls and boys, men and women, and we've undertaken to reduce that gap in Africa.
Even with all those mobile phones, huh?
Even with all those mobile phones in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, all those mobile phones, still there's a 37% gap between men and women in sub-Saharan Africa, and we've undertaken to reduce that gap by 50% by 2016 in partnership with probably many of the organizations represented in this conversation today. But that's, we believe, giving women in particular that access and opening up the world to them of information at their fingertips and communication and the ability to share and network and help raise one another up. That is one of the single most impactful things that we can do to enable the leaders. And I think that's a really key thing that we have found, is that it's not a matter of Intel going out and identifying leaders or training leaders. Our role is to provide tools and resources that allow them to rise up themselves.
And have you faced any cultural backlash in helping to empower women? Has that been an issue?
Yeah. Yeah, it would be naive to pretend that we don't have to navigate this landscape rather carefully, because there are cultural issues and places where, as an American-based company, it would be easy for us to put a foot wrong, and instead of helping, that we could actually interfere with that kind of progress. So having to learn fast how we navigate in that kind of an environment is something that has been a real learning experience for us as well.
Share those lessons, all of you, on that. How do you deal with that?
Well, for instance, in providing access to internet and technology, you know, one of the barriers are numerous, and they can be very fundamental. a very large proportion of boys in sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world get their access to the internet in internet cafes, which are frankly pretty unsavory places for girls or young women to show their faces, and they're places where their fathers in particular have absolutely no willingness to allow them to be. So recognizing that there's some right on their side, that those are not places where it's necessarily safe for these young women, and to work to advocate for there to be days when it's set aside so that girls or women have safe and open access during these days or these hours of these days, to make access more available in schools and school environments, to make sure that schools have basic sanitary facilities that allow girls, once they reach 11, 12, 13 years old, to continue with their schooling and to continue to have access to technology, and then to provide training so that if they get themselves in front of a computer or with access to the technology, that they know what to do with it, that time isn't wasted. So
we've got to wrap this up. 2 quick pieces of advice from each one of you, or one piece from each one of you on investing in women if you're a private sector entity.
Well, you know, AAI has been investing in both men and women since our inception. You know, we've been pioneers in that. I mean, the 23,000 individuals that I mentioned, many of them are women, and many went on to become very important and prominent individuals. So we've done that. We've done the work. All of our programs include men and women, and we rarely ever get backlash on the continent about the work that we're doing.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate it.